Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Martinez. I'm the mayor of Gadventures, and essentially all that means is I have the great pleasure of championing the passionate, purpose-driven people that make up Gadventures. And every once in a while, I get to hang out with fine folks such as all of you to dig into really rich conversations like the one we're going to have today. So I do want to take a moment to welcome everyone today. We're expecting around 500 people from around the world. So a massive hello to all of our friends in Canada, the United Kingdom, the United States, and also some of our friends from even further around the world, our friends in Ireland, the Netherlands, and Thailand. Sawadee Kap, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We hope you and your families are safe and well at this time. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us for the latest and the last in our Retravel Live series, addressing how we can reshape travel on the other side of the pandemic. As people are starting to head back out into the world, we felt it was the right time to wrap up with what that experience looks like right now. This is our 8th event in the series, so a huge shout out to all of you who have supported us over the past year. This won't be the last you hear from us in terms of virtual events, however, so please stay tuned for more updates. Now, as the world is reopening, we wanted to have a discussion with travel experts who have been out in the world traveling, so we can give you an idea of what to expect and how to prepare to travel again, and also to check in on what's changed since the pandemic forced the world's borders to close 18 months ago. Now, before we get started with the conversation, I do have a couple housekeeping items. So first things first, we've collected all of your questions in advance and are going to do our very best to answer as many of those as possible throughout the content of today's conversation. In addition, if you didn't have a chance to ask a question before, or maybe you're really inspired by today's conversation, we will be opening up the question and answer function in Zoom. So please take advantage of that, and we'll try to answer some of those towards the end of today's session. In addition, we recommend that everyone selects fit to screen at the top of your Zoom menu to ensure you have the best possible viewing experience. And finally, we're going to be recording this session and making it available via our YouTube channel. Now, without further ado, I've given you so many notes. I think it's time we get into this conversation, and I'll kick things off with some introductions. So first off, I'd like to introduce our host and moderator today, Bruce Poontip. Bruce is an entrepreneur, philanthropist, and pioneer of community tourism who is inspired by travel's potential to be a force for good. This passion led him to start Gadventures 31 years ago this year. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Awesome. Today, Bruce will be joined by Oneika Raymond. Oneika is a media personality and journalist and a Gadventures wanderer and keynote speaker. She's also an on-air travel and lifestyle correspondent for NBC New York and CTV Canada, the author of the award-winning travel blog, Oneika the Traveler, and has traveled to more than 115 countries, most recently with her husband and young daughter, Kira. Welcome.
You're on mute.
Pleasure to have you here as well.
Again. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here as well. We also have Sarah Marshall joining us today. Sarah is a travel editor and writer and specializes in wildlife, nature, and adventure travel. Sarah Marshall writes for a variety of national newspapers and magazines in the UK, including the Daily Telegraph, The Times, National Geographic Traveller, and Wanderlust. She's also the travel editor for the UK's Press Association. During the pandemic, Sarah has been fortunate enough to travel extensively through Africa, including Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, where she worked on conservation and wildlife-focused features. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you.
Great to see you.
Great to see you too.
And we've also got Tony Concil on the panel today. Tony is the Vice President of Corporate Communications at IATA. Tony's responsible for IATA's media relations, brand, digital communications, and internal communications. Now, for those who might not know, IATA is the International Air Transport Association and is the trade association for the world's airlines, representing some 290 airlines or 82% of total air traffic. Needless to say, Tony knows a lot about flying. Tony's lived in Canada, Japan, Singapore, and Switzerland, and is fluent in English and Japanese. Welcome, Tony.
Hey, good day. Thank you.
And on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Bruce to get this conversation started. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome, everybody. Great to see you all. Great to have you today. A very interesting conversation in our last Retravel. But I should correct what Chris is saying. There's two of us that have traveled and two of us who haven't on this panel. So we'll get during this pandemic. I mean, I've done a little bit of domestic travel, but have not traveled internationally since this pandemic escalated. But we'll start with you, Sarah, Oneika. You've both traveled at the height of the pandemic as well as in recent months. So maybe you can just tell me a bit about where you've been more recently and through the pandemic, and how that experience was and is now. And I'll start with you, Sarah.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to do two quite big trips at the end of last year, both to Africa, and they were about a month long. But my biggest one has been this year. I went for 6 months, which was incredible to be able to go around East Africa to Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania. I mean, the hardest part, I think, was actually getting there. But once I'd arrived in Africa, it was relatively easy. Once you're out and you're moving around, I actually found the process much more straightforward than I thought it would be. It was obviously fantastic to see these destinations, in all their beauty, and especially having been locked down for so long. But it was quite surprising how much more simpler it was than I thought it was going to be.
And what about you, Oneika?
So I traveled a fair bit as well. Mostly my travels, however, were limited to Europe and around the US. I did actually travel a fair bit within Mexico and the Caribbean. And so for me, I'm typically based in New York. I'm actually coming to you from Germany right now, but my base is New York City. And as you all have probably read or seen or just know, New York was hit very hard by the pandemic. When we look at March 2020 through about June, I mean, the number of cases and the number of deaths were absolutely appalling. So living in New York at that time, at that time in history, that crucial and pivotal moment when we were, basically affronted by this disease or this affliction that we really knew nothing about. It was quite scary. However, I did begin traveling domestically that summer, and I found it not as onerous. So similarly to Sarah, not as onerous as I would have thought. And then we ventured farther afield. So we flew over to Europe in September of last year and stayed for about a month. We traveled within Germany, Switzerland, and Greece. And I think it was very much like getting onto a bike. When you have traveled extensively, certain things fall into place. And I know that due to the way the pandemic was handled in New York City and how the city managed to, mostly overcome and thrive despite being hit so hard by the pandemic, I think a lot of that fear of traveling was alleviated because I was pretty much in the hot spot. Now that I'm fully vaccinated, and now that case numbers are going down in a number of places, I do feel far more comfortable traveling. I travel with my young daughter. She's 18 months old. And we take our precautions. We get masked up. We test as normal. And luckily, being in the US, there is such great access. There's incredible access to vaccines and to testing as well. So we're always able to make sure that we're traveling safely and monitoring what our status is before trips and after trips.
Great. Well, my little experience. So when the pandemic and everything shut down the earth, starting around March 13th, I was actually in Barbados. So my only flight during the pandemic. And I thought, okay, well, things are going to shut down and people are quarantining. I'll just quarantine here. And then our prime minister came on live television and said, all Canadians come back home now. And that was a surreal kind of experience where everyone was being recalled back to their country. And so my only flight was I traveled on the 23rd of March, which was right at the height. traveling back, and my experience was just scary. That's the only way, and just heartbreaking. As a person who's never thought about getting on a plane, and it's second nature to me. It's like taking the bus. Having traveled so much that having that experience where it was actually confrontational in the airport, and people were scared, and it was like it's almost like it was intense, and I was heartbroken because I knew travel was going to be broken for some time. I didn't think it was going to be this long, mind you, but I just knew that it was going to take a while to get back. But Tony, Tony and I are the people that haven't traveled at all during the pandemic very much. But Tony, we're probably both super keen to travel internationally again. But as representing IATA, tell us a little bit about what to expect maybe in the air, in the in-air experience at the moment. I know it obviously varies by airline, and there's a big issue right now in the news. The headlines today, actually, I heard this morning, is airlines with vaccine mandates for their employees and everything that's going on there. So maybe you can just say, can I be safe and still enjoy the flying experience now, and you can let our audience know?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Myself, I haven't traveled for over a year, but I'm about to embark on my first long-haul trip this Friday, heading back to Canada, actually, from Switzerland. So, I certainly don't have any concerns about safety. I think the industry has put in place lots of precautions to ensure that we're complying with the best of advice from the World Health Organization, from what governments are asking. We're a long way away from where we were in March of last year, when people didn't know a lot about this virus. We didn't know what measures to take. Today, I think the amount of information we have provides a solid scientific basis for the measures that are in place. If you're going to travel, I think people should be expecting to wear masks, and that I don't think should be such a big deal, because we've all become, I think, accustomed to wearing masks in places where you're close to other people. So you can expect to wear a mask on the plane. You can expect to fill out some forms, because the industry is required to check that documentation to make sure that when you arrive at destination, you have everything in place so that you'll have a smooth entry into the country that you're going to. And if you're concerned about that, there's the IATA Travel Center, which you can access through our website and find out what the requirements are. It's free of charge, and you can check out your itinerary against your own personal credentials and find out what you need to do. And you can probably expect maybe some lower service levels than you might have expected during or before the pandemic, because some of the types of services that we were offering before we just can't do at the current state. But I don't think it should be any hardship for travelers. At least we haven't seen that in any of the monitoring that we've done. But I can share with you some very good news. We do and have been doing regular polling of travelers throughout the crisis. And in the last poll that we did, which was in June of this year, we asked people who have traveled since the introduction of these new measures. So basically, people who have traveled since June 2020, what their experience was like. And 90% of them came back and said that the airline personnel did a good job of enforcing the rules and safety measures during their trip. 89% said that the protective measures were well implemented. 86% said that the measures made them feel very safe while they were on board the aircraft. So I think that should be reassuring to those passengers who haven't traveled yet, that the people who have done so far seem to have had very good experiences.
Has that been your experience, Oneika? Like, does your experience flying match up with what Tony's saying? Oh, you're on mute.
I keep on forgetting that I'm on mute. I apologize.
No problem.
No, but it's absolutely been that. And I think what Tony said about us being a long way away from March 2020 is so correct. We have so much more information available to us at our fingertips, literally and figuratively, that a lot of the fears for most of us have been alleviated, including myself. So I do feel very comfortable on the plane. I bring along my hand sanitizer. I am well aware that I need to get to the airport earlier to either check bags or fill out forms or give whatever information is necessary. And, we wear our masks and we do all of the things within our power to ensure that we are not only traveling safely in order to be safe ourselves, but also responsibly and traveling and traveling in such a way that we're taking care of our fellow men or women as well. So I do feel very comfortable. I absolutely believe in science. And I am very, I guess, I'm not sure what the right word is, but I feel very comfortable in the knowledgeable hands of the IATA and other bodies that are tasked with making us get around safely.
And what about you, Sarah?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I feel the same. The actual flying itself felt very safe. And what you've got to remember is that these guys have been flying throughout the pandemic. I mean, albeit on a kind of skeleton scale, they've been going through it. So they've had time to fine tune all the practices. And I can tell the difference from when I flew after the first lockdown, so last year, compared to flying again this year. Within 6 months, the difference is huge. Like, everyone feels quite comfortable with the processes. You get on board, they know what's going on, and that made me feel very reassured as well. I think the stress comes beforehand. It's knowing all the paperwork you need to do, knowing what the restrictions are, working out which forms you have to fill in. And fortunately now, a lot of the airlines, they've got some really good pages where you can actually go through to each destination and find out what's required so that you've got everything you need. When I first started traveling last year, there wasn't any of that, and it was so confusing. People didn't know what was going on, what the rules were. But now it does feel as if there's a lot more control. Like Oneika said, I think you need time. You need to get to the airport a bit early. You need to prepare your trips a little earlier and plan a bit more. And if you do that, then you take away the stress and you feel a bit more reassured as well. But as for flying, yeah, I felt probably safer in the airport and on a plane than I do walking down the street in London in terms of COVID. So
that's a really good point. I actually want to just ask you this, Tony, because I actually think our greatest challenge in the travel industry is to get people flying again. Because people are asking us as a tour operator, like, what are we going to do on the ground? It's pointless if people won't fly to the destination. I think that flying, you're in a contained space for a long period of time, and there's no way of getting around that. And until we get people feeling safe again to travel, I think it's our biggest obstacle to get travel back to where it was. But Tony, I just want to ask you, because has the actual plane experience or technically changed at all on board, like for travelers? And I ask that because I think there was this urban myth prior to the pandemic that people say the air is circulated, the air on a plane is circulated, and that's actually not true. And I know airlines have been on a kind of PR campaign to kind of say, I don't think they cared before the pandemic, but there was always this thing that, I'm going to get sick on a plane because the air circulated. But it's now showing that that's actually not true. That the air quality is actually cleaner on a plane than it would be in a lot of contained spaces that you'd normally be in. Has anything changed in that area in terms of, or even regulations changed in that area for planes?
No. So I guess the first thing to say is on the confidence side, we have been monitoring people's confidence. And when we started to ask questions at the beginning of the pandemic, we had very high levels of people responding that they thought the air on the aircraft was very dangerous. They were concerned about touching things on the aircraft. They were concerned about their seat backs, touching menus, things like that. They were concerned about the cleanliness. What we've seen over the course of the crisis is that confidence in understanding that the air on board the aircraft is very safe has increased. So that's positive. And you're correct in saying that the air is safer than in most environments. And there are a few reasons for that. The first is the air is filtered. So there's something called HEPA filters, which are just similar type of filters that they use in operating theaters. So any air that's recirculated in the aircraft is circulated through the filter. And that is so powerful that it can stop viruses, et cetera, from being circulated in the cabin. Second thing is air comes in from the outside. So there's air exchange. And what the air exchange does is probably up to two or three times per minute, exchanges the air in the aircraft. So that means that part of the air is recycled, part of the air is new. And that's different than you would have in a theater, or it's different than you would have in an office building where the air is recycled inside, and unless you open the window, it's not necessarily exchanged. So that's another layer of protection. On top of that, when you travel, you've been on an aircraft, you've probably seen that there are, they're called gaspers, but basically air vents above your seat. Okay. What those do is they direct the air, and they operate in line with how the circulation system on the aircraft works. And the circulation system doesn't go from back to front in the aircraft. It goes from top to bottom. So if one person is sick, generally speaking, the air is contained around them. It's pushed down to the floor of the aircraft through the filtration system and either outside or recirculated as clean air. So people should feel very, very safe about the air in the aircraft. One of the things, however, that we did notice in our surveys is when we talk to people who have traveled and people who haven't traveled, and you look at the two responses separately, people who haven't traveled are less concerned about touching things in the aircraft than people who have traveled. So I imagine when people get into the aircraft, they suddenly see themselves with other people around them, and they're looking and maybe trying to adjust to that new environment that perhaps they haven't been in for several months. And I think you'll probably notice as a reassuring measure that many airlines are offering little sanitary kits. So you can wipe down the seat if you want to be further reassured. The airlines do a good job of cleaning, but perhaps if you're a nervous flyer, you might want to take measures into your own hands and bring some sanitizing wipes or whatever, and have that with you if you want to feel an extra layer of reassurance. So maybe that's something that travelers can take on board themselves. But in general, what we've seen in the data that's coming in is people want to get back to travel. And we have almost 2/3 of passengers telling us that within 2 months of the pandemic becoming under control, they want to be out on the road if they can. And I think that's good news for all of us.
That is the best description yet I've heard about the air in a plane. So I'm so glad I asked that question. That I learned a ton in that little.
Okay, I've answered it 100 times in the pandemic.
Okay, well, no, that's amazing because I read about that, but our audience doesn't, and there's still that nervousness about, and the air circulation, and the message of all is the air quality is cleaner than in most places that you consider safe now. That's the message, and this urban myth of circulated air, recycled air is not the case, and it never has been the case. But let's just go, because the other thing that we surveyed a lot of our people, and there's a lot of travel agents here that sell travel that are attending today. Oneika, I just want to go on the ground experience of testing. I think because they have to explain this to their customers, and people are worried about that. Like, there's no problem getting a test when you're home because you can arrange that. But a lot of people are, have questions just quickly about, getting a test locally, that experience, how you do it, and then the hassle of, showing that test or getting tested when you arrive, all of that stuff. How has that been for you, having traveled? It seems like you've traveled the most in this group. How's the testing?
To be honest with you, it's very onerous. It is something that takes a lot of time. It is quite expensive in many cases. And I recommend that anybody who's considering traveling, finding a testing center locally, so in your destination of choice, should be one of the first things you do when you think that you're going to travel to this particular destination, because you surely don't want to fly there and then realize that it's going to be difficult to get testing to get back home, or alternatively, that it's going to be exceptionally costly, or both. So that's something that you really should be looking into at the point that you're making your decision to travel to that destination. Now, I've traveled to a host of destinations that have had a very wide range of requirements for entry. For example, even though I'm based in the US and based in New York, I traveled to Puerto Rico this March. And most destinations, to be fair, require a negative PCR test. And that's PCR, not just a rapid test, but a PCR test, negative rapid test, taken within 72 hours of arrival into wherever you're going. So even though I was traveling from the US to the US, because I was crossing the sea, because I was crossing an ocean, I was required to have a negative PCR test result that I could furnish and upload to Puerto Rico, the Puerto Rico government website prior to getting on the plane to Puerto Rico. And then once in destination, I then had to provide, show the negative test again. And then prior to getting back on the plane to the continental US, back on the plane to New York, I had to get a test in Puerto Rico. And now, if you get the test at the airport, it costs $130. Luckily, I did my research and was able to get a test done in San Juan, so in the city, in the capital, for $25. But that's not the case for other destinations. For example, I was just in Grenada, and the tests there are about $150 US. And not only are you required to furnish a negative PCR test before arrival in the country, you also have to get another one done upon arrival in the airport. And then you have to quarantine for 48 hours. And then you have to get another test done in order to re-enter the US. And that may be different if you're traveling into Canada. I'm not as aware of the rules. So all of that to say that that cheap ticket you may have found to this amazing destination that you're really excited to get to, you need to factor in the costs, the relative costs for getting tested in order to enter that destination and then in order to get back home. So that's a really important consideration. And so that's something that I really stress should be part of the trip planning process. And it will end up saving you a lot of stress in the end, because I encounter so many people, for example, even contacting me on social media, and they are frantic because they realize that, where they're going requires all of this extra testing, which can be onerous, as I said before, and costly. And it requires a lot of advanced prep.
Excellent. But the actual, so the cost aside, is every country different in terms of I think people are more worried about the difficulty. Like they don't know when you go to a country. Yeah, like locally, you think so. In our case, we're as tour operators, we have our CEOs on the ground, our chief experience officers, facilitate and help finding. We've had to actually change some itineraries sometime to make sure we're in a location 48 hours prior to departure that our customers can get tested. So we can, help facilitate that. I mean, we don't cover costs, but we obviously help facilitate it because our customers need it to leave. And so we've actually had to change itineraries. But is the hassle? I think that's what people when you're in a foreign country, the idea of having to arrange your own test and finding a medical center to get a test. But I mean, and I'm kind of answering my own question, but all countries are motivated to get travelers there. And so have you found it easy to find tests and set it up yourself outside of the cost?
I've actually found it relatively easy. Typically, when you go on the tourism board website or the governmental website for a destination, they will have a page that is hyperlinked with all of the information you need for entry. And also all of the information that you need with regards to getting testing in destination. So for example, off the top of my head, I mentioned Puerto Rico and Grenada when we were chatting, or when I was answering your question a little bit earlier. If you go on the Puerto Rican Tourism Authority website, if you go on the Grenada Tourism Association website, there is a full page dedicated to testing. And at that point, they will give you the addresses of places that you get tested. Now, usually what the testing that they're recommending is quite expensive. If you are crafty or if you are in the know, you can probably find a different location to get your testing done at a cheaper rate. Because again, I get a lot of people concerned about the cost. But in terms of access, typically on the website of whatever governmental organization for the destination that is responsible for the destination, you will find quite clearly, resources where you can get your tests done. As well, something to consider is to find out whether your accommodation can actually provide you with testing, or alternatively can help you seek out a test. So I was in Aruba, and the hotel that I was staying at actually had a testing center on property. I'm in Germany right now, and there are testing centers in every shopping center here. Probably within a 2-kilometer radius, there are about 5 testing centers that I've seen since I've been here. So depending on where you're going, depending on where you're staying, that will absolutely dictate how easy or difficult it will be to find testing. But chances are, if that destination has some sort of website, you will be able to find that information listed there, or at least it'll be a really great start.
Excellent. I mean, that's a ringing endorsement for traveling with Gadventures, because we help facilitate all that. We take all the hassle out of that. So
There
traveling now, when there's complications, tour operators like us and other tour operators, it's a ringing endorsement to go with a professional who can help facilitate.
And honestly, this is the time to lean into travel experts. This is the time to employ or use agents and to use operators, because they are really in the know. It is their job to be in the know. So why struggle when you can get support?
That is an amazing statement. I couldn't agree more. And and it's been proven over and over in history. When 9/11, the tsunami, whenever there's even that Icelandic volcano that happened a few years back, whenever there's something massive, the travel professional, the travel agent rides in as a hero, because everyone needs that. Because using websites is good, when all things are good, but when things go to pot or things disrupt, someone advocating for you and having a travel professional, is a ringing endorsement for the travel industry. But Sarah, let's go to you.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, actually, because when I was traveling, I got myself into one of those situations. I was in Kenya and everything locked down. I mean, when Kenya does a lockdown, you have 24 hours to get out, and that's it. It's very, very quick. So Nairobi was locking down, all the domestic flights stopped. I was basically stuck. And it was the only reason I managed to get an evacuation pass to get back into Nairobi and leave was because I had an agent who organized it.
There's 1,000 stories like this.
It was just so valuable.
And let's just I'll just put a plug, because this isn't necessarily about traveling, but as an operator, when the world started shutting down, which you could never imagine, you only seen this in Will Smith or Matt Damon movies, suddenly the world is shutting down, and we have thousands, tens of thousands of people all over the world on trips. And we suddenly have to look at, a blanket group of people trying to get people home. But the people that are safest are the ones that have agents that advocate for them here and contact us directly. And even though, the phones are crazy and we did our best, and, some can criticize what we did or how we kind of reevaluate how we could have done things better. But the ones who had an agent or who had a professional that was advocating for them, gave them that independent service, because we couldn't call everybody individually. And so we got a lot of our passengers angry when they got form letters from us saying we're doing this or doing that, because we were communicating with tens of thousands of people. Whereas the people who had an agent had someone to speak to them and say, everything's going to be okay. I'm going to do what I can. And they had someone that they can contact and just feel that, someone was looking after them.
Yeah.
Anyways. But Sarah, I'm going to stay with you and just ask about the benefits of traveling now. So we want to get people to travel again. What are the benefits of traveling right now and in the coming months? We're all in this. It's changing every day, obviously. There's success. There's a relative success with the vaccine in developed countries. There's obviously an argument about the in developing countries getting vaccines available. But what are the benefits right now with traveling right now?
I think from the traveler's perspective, I mean, the obvious benefit is getting to see these places without the crowds. I was so fortunate. I got to go gorilla trekking. I was the only person on the trek. Selfishly, that was fantastic because I got to see this amazing wildlife encounter. Of course, it's tempered by the fact, that you're in the back of your mind worrying what's going to happen with the income and the revenue that's needed for these kind of conservation projects. But in terms of actually what you see, if you travel now, you're getting to see these places. It's so beautiful, and to really, really experience the core of them. So I think that's number one. Secondly, coming out of a lockdown or coming out of a period of not traveling for so long, it is so liberating, and Oneika can probably kind of agree with that, you know, that first trip that you do, that first big trip, the feeling of appreciation, the feeling of wonder, and it's like, you know, traveling for the first time again. And it's such an incredible emotional journey. I felt that, and I've kind of tried to cling on to it with all my travels now. And I want that to be something I do more often, you know, to stand back, look at where I am, totally appreciate it. So there's that. And then I think, you know, as you mentioned before, traveling in developing countries, and a lot of my travels were through Africa. So, you know, these are places that hugely rely on tourism revenue. So to go and know that your money is helping people in that way, and you see it firsthand, you know the impact that you're making, not just on the communities, but also on the wildlife. And that's a fantastic feeling as well. And I just think that from now on, the way we travel has to change a little bit. We have to be more mindful about how we spend our money, what we're doing with our time and how we invest it. And I think this is a really good time to address that.
Yes. Anyone else have any thought, any feedback on that in terms of just traveling now, the benefits?
I think that Sarah hit the nail on the head. Everything you said. Basically, I was nodding my head in agreement, because I myself have such a greater and a deeper and a renewed appreciation for travel. I think if you were somebody who travels for a living, you could get jaded. It's something that you do all the time. You could say, oh, well, you know, I've been to Petra and I've been to all of these incredible desert destinations, and they don't blow me away in the same way anymore. But there's something about having your movement restricted and realizing that travel is an immense privilege that we have. So I do agree that it has been exceptionally liberating to be able to go out and move about the world again, albeit more mindfully and cautiously. With that being said, I do think personally, and this may be true for other people as well, that the pandemic really allowed me to explore what lies on my doorstep, or what is in my my literal and figurative backyard. I've lived in New York City for just over 5 years, but I hadn't traveled to a lot or many of the United States. I haven't traveled that much throughout the country. And so being in the throes of this pandemic and not even being able to fly home to Canada without a number of restrictions caused me to seek out travel and destinations around the US, and destinations that I could be safe in, and destinations where I could socially distance and travel responsibly. And so I think for so many of us, that this pandemic has not only caused us to have a greater appreciation for traveling, but it's also led us to discover and explore our own backyards more, which I think is really, really important for us to do.
Excellent. And I'll just say, as a tour, from a tour operator's perspective, the experience on the ground is incredible. Our customers could not be happier. The welcoming, like the world needs tourism in a way that it doesn't need a lot of things, just for the economy's sake, helping a lot of small businesses, families, especially the way we travel. And the welcoming of our travelers is felt by our customers. We're seeing it in all of our customers. We've run about 400 or 500 trips already. We have 300, I think, or 400 going in August. So we're starting to travel. But the experience is so welcoming, so unique right now. And the best part is the travelers are more open than I've seen in 30 years. You know, as operators, we spent all of our time trying to please customers, as we should. That's our job. But customers' mindsets arriving right now are so different. And we're just loving it, because they're just like, what do we have to do? Yeah. We'll do anything to travel, and we're here. Tell us what we have to do to keep ourselves and our hosts safe. And we just want to have an awesome time. We're totally flexible. And, you know, as things change and we can't get into a restaurant or social distancing, or we have to go into a museum for a certain time for only 1 hour because of whatever, because of regulations. Machu Picchu is now timed, for instance, and you have to set up a specific time. We can't just buy tickets 6 months before and come whatever time we want. All of those things, and our customers are amazing, and they're just so flexible and so open, which they should be actually all the time. We didn't need a pandemic to be this way, but it's just amazing to see our travelers. As an operator, we're having the greatest time like with our customers because they're so wide-eyed and excited to be traveling. And there's just this added feeling of exploration because you're kind of breaking away from, this, there's this thing, the term going on about revenge travel, which we're not into that whole concept, but people have this, I'm going to travel because I'm so passionate about it and because it's good for the world. And, and we're loving the travelers right now. But Tony, I'm going to start with you because we're going to try and tackle the Delta variant. Everyone's talking about the Delta variant, and what would you say to someone who is hesitating to book as a result of this, especially if they're fully vaccinated? And what are the airlines, I guess, saying about the Delta variant?
Yeah, so I'll get to that. If I can maybe just go back to the paperwork issue that we discussed earlier.
Sure.
And just wanted to and it's predated. Travel is a little bit more complicated than it was before. That's for sure. And one of the things we're trying to do is to make it easy. And we're not alone. So there are a number of organizations that are putting together apps that will help travelers to organize the paperwork that's needed for travel. And one of the important reasons that we need to do that is if you think about the way people traveled prior to the pandemic, most people checked in online. They probably dropped their bag off in a very simple process. They maybe used a kiosk at the airport. So the airports are no longer designed to handle every passenger at the check-in desk. And as travel ramps up, if every passenger that needs to travel needs to go back to the check-in desk for a physical check-in so that we can look at paper documentation, we're going to have a real problem in the airports. People are going to be waiting for a long, long period of time. So we're doing our best to try and automate that process and linking with what the government requirements are. We are launching an app called the Ayata Travel Pass, which your airline needs to invite you to use it. So not all airlines are using it yet. Some are using different travel passes. So they will inform you as to what to do. But it's really important that as much of that documentation as travelers can get in an automated form to the airline through the travel pass or through websites, the easier their journey is going to be at the airport. And the easier everyone else's journey is going to be at the airport because nobody wants to be stuck in a line or a queue these days. So that's one thing. On the Delta variant, we, as the association, our position is that if you're double vaccinated, you should be able to travel. And that aligns with what the WHO has been saying as well. So for people who have completed the vaccination process, they should be able to travel without worry. Obviously, the Delta variant has gotten governments concerned, and some are changing the rules. So I think the real important advice to travelers is that they should travel with confidence, but they should also make sure they check with their destination to make sure that they have all the paperwork and that the rules haven't changed, because we're still in that stage where the rules are changing and sometimes quite quickly. So do your research, but travel with confidence, I think is the message there. And I noticed in the queue, there was one question about the website where people could check on travel restrictions. So it's the IATAtravelcenter.com, and you can access that free of charge.
Excellent. That's amazing advice. So this conversation is so good, but we have so many amazing questions. Like when we normally don't get good questions, I'll be honest with you. This is a particularly hot audience because I always look at the questions and then think, oh, those are pretty common questions, which we often cover in our conversation. So we have to get to these questions because there's some amazing ones. So for some reason, today we have an amazing audience. But I just want to get, so quickly, I'm going to ask for all of you to do a quick tip. And then I'm going to call Chris back and we're going to answer some of the questions. I want to make sure we get to them. So just one tip you would give people before they go back out into the world they might not have thought of. I'll start with you, Sarah. Quick tip.
I would say be flexible. and give yourself time. That's time as in getting there early to the airport, being prepared, but also time in a destination. Spend a bit longer, really give yourself an opportunity to enjoy that place.
Excellent. Oneika.
I was going to say time as well. People really underestimate how much longer things take, from security to checking in. It takes longer. So make sure that you give yourself enough time to avoid disappointment, especially with all the documents needing to be checked before you get on the plane.
And I'm from the school that will never complain about airports again. So I spent my entire life complaining about airports and time and how it takes, and I will never do that again. If we can go back to the way it was, I'll be happy and never complain about airports again. And Tony, one tip.
Yeah. Well, first, on your airport experience, hopefully we're going to get better in terms of the airport experience as a result of the crisis, because we've invested a lot in contactless travel. So, using things like biometric identification, near field communication or Bluetooth types of applications. Hopefully your trip after COVID, and once we get through this adjustment period, will actually be much more convenient. But in terms of a tip, I think it's really do your homework and make sure if you're traveling by air, you have the documentation ready, because it's a terrible thing when the check-in staff have to say, sorry, we can't board you because you don't have the right documentation. And the airlines will do everything they can do to help you. But the problem is if we take you to a destination that won't let you in, it doesn't do either of us any good. So the airlines will try and communicate as clearly as possible what needs to happen. The government websites will do the same. But please pay attention to all those emails that come in, because sometimes they have really important steps that you need to take.
And my single tip, if I can add one, and I know I'm not supposed to because I'm the host, but I will anyways, follow the science and read the right websites and get off headline news. The headline news that it's so politicized and confusing right now in terms of, and if you're looking for that for your support system, you're not going to get it. There's so many sites, whether it be IATA or the WHO, every country has their own websites. There's so much information out there, but you just have to read. Go and find the right information that relies on science and data-backed information and suggestions. Everyone wants to keep you safe, and everyone wants you to travel. And so there's tons of information out there, but you're not going to get that if you're watching headline news, because and the best example of that is this whole politicization of the vaccine passport. Like there's no such thing. They've just created a word called vaccine passport, because proof of vaccinations have existed since the dawn of travel. We've had to have proof of vaccinations everywhere to go anywhere. Whether it's yellow fever to get into places in Africa, everyone has that yellow book that they travel with all their inoculations, proof of vaccination. But suddenly it's this idea of a vaccine passport has been linked to civil liberties and freedom, and it's just a word that's been politicized. So read the science, follow the right websites, and that's my tip, and you will feel more than comfortable to travel again. So Chris, we need you back. We have so many great questions, and we got 10 minutes left. I saw some great questions there. So help us out.
I'm back. I've got questions. This has been such an informative conversation. We were literally just talking about that on the side. It's been really informative. I'm ready to get on a flight. So let's kick things off. Tony, we're going to start with you. I've got a question from Jeff Bloom, and it reads, my hesitancy about flying is not technical. It's more about my fellow passengers who are not vaccinated and or refuse to wear a mask. What do you expect will happen to alleviate that fear?
Well, if you're traveling internationally these days, either you're vaccinated or you're tested or you're recovered. So increasingly, you should be confident that the travelers around you, comply with those rules. I think the other thing that's important, and I mentioned it at the top of the discussion, is there are procedures in place on board the aircraft to ensure people's safety. And the main thing there is mask wearing. And the information we're getting, we hear some anecdotal evidence of, some difficulties there, or some people who are resisting, but the vast majority of travelers are complying with the mask wearing. We see that in our numbers. And if you travel, wear your mask and rely on the crew to help ensure that everyone else on the aircraft is wearing the mask.
Great, thank you. This next one's for Oneika. The question reads, did you experience any travel shaming from people who did not share your risk tolerance? As a potential traveler this fall or winter, I have some concerns about receiving backlash from those who choose to stay home. But I can also see the benefit of helping the local community in destination. It's a toughie.
Wow, excellent question. And to answer, yes, I absolutely did get travel shamed, especially last summer when I began traveling with my family. And one of the things that I say, and this is something that a number of people, I saw this quote kind of floating around on the internet. And to paraphrase, it is that safety is in actions and not necessarily in destinations. So I had a lot of people trying to travel shame me, giving me flack for going to XYZ destination. And one of the things that I always stressed to anybody who's follows me on social media or my blog or my reports on NBC or what have you, is that it's not where you go, it is rather what you do and how you do it. So that being said, when I did travel, I took all of the necessary precautions, and this is what I counsel anybody to do: testing, quarantining, masking, all of these different things. And especially in the early days of the pandemic, I made sure that I traveled to destinations where I could do virtually everything in the open air. So my travels last summer consisted of road trips through the national parks in the American Southwest. So I traveled to Nevada and Utah and Arizona, and I had an absolutely fabulous time. And to be honest with all of you, I could run in a circle and not touch anyone. I mean, my voice was echoing through canyons because it was so empty and there was so much space. Living in New York City, which is a very densely populated city, and living in a high-rise apartment building in New York City, I actually found it safer to rent an apartment for a month in South Beach in the state of Florida for a month so that I could socially distance. So my family and I, we spent the month of January in Florida, which was a COVID hotspot. But the way we did Florida allowed us to be safer than if we had continued to stay in New York City. So that is what I counsel people to do. And I think that if you are traveling, it is so important for you to believe in science and to remain convicted and to feel very confident and comfortable with your choice and to try to travel as responsibly and as safely as you possibly can. Because safety, once again, is in what you do and how you do it and not necessarily where you go.
And just to add to that, Oneika, you have an 18-month-old. You mentioned you have an 18-month-old now. So last year, it would have been 6 months old.
Yes.
So I just wanted to mention that because that's just an inspiration. That's an absolute inspiration for people.
She did her first plane trip at 6 months old. We traveled to California, long flight. And admittedly, I was really concerned because she was at that stage where she was touching everything. And again, now we have way more information and we know about the virus and how little, I guess, it lives on surfaces and whatnot. But I had a lot of anxiety surrounding that. But we brought our hygienic wipes, we sanitized everything, and we did the best that we could. And luckily, I mean, we've all remained COVID-free. We've been really healthy. And, we've continued to live our lives as responsibly and safely, to the extent that we're doing it responsibly and safely as safely as we could.
Not where you go, it's what you do and how you do it. Love it. Thank you. Last question is going to go to Sarah. And the question is, being fully vaccinated, I'm not afraid of flying, but I'm afraid of the growth in poverty during the pandemic, especially in a country where tourism is their main form of economy for most people. I'm afraid for my physical safety. How safe do you think travel will be?
Well, I can only talk about my experience in Africa, but obviously, the countries I was visiting are, a lot of them, like Uganda, for example, a very poor country that's heavily reliant on tourism. I personally felt very safe. I always have done in a lot of these destinations. Yes, there is more poverty. I mean, you can see that. But on the flip side, a lot of people have adapted and switched to other work. So you've got people who were working in tourism who now have gone back to doing some sort of farming, or, you know, they've got a chicken farm, they have other projects they're working on. So people are very adaptable, they're resilient, they survive, they find ways. I don't think anyone would see a tourist as a target. I think quite the opposite, actually. I think people would be so desperate to make any tourists feel welcome, to have them back, that they would try to make you feel as comfortable as possible. Because, you know, they're clever. They know that if they treat these people well, then more tourists are going to come. People will feel safe. The word spreads around, and that's, you know, that's how I felt. I felt so welcome everywhere I went. People were genuinely really, really pleased that, you know, that I was coming, that they thought more tourists would then come. So I would say, don't be afraid of poverty. Don't be afraid of you know, of any sort of theft or anything like that. I don't think that would happen. I think actually by traveling, you are contributing to these economies, you are helping people, and it's a very positive move.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah. And our next question comes from Michael Campbell, and I'm going to take this one. But the question is, would G-Adventure officers assist in educating us with respect to the destinations we're going to? So Tony mentioned a great tool earlier, and we wanted to take an opportunity to share another tool to support you all. So on our website, you can check out our Where Can I Travel To app. And essentially with this app, it allows you to check the latest travel regulations and safety requirements for your departure country on our easy to use travel restriction finder. So before you book, you can find out if travel is open, what testing is required, the length of quarantines needed, and some more information. So Michael, hopefully that helps you. But for all of you checking out this session today, you can visit our website and check out the Where Can I Travel To app. Sounds good? On that note, I just want to take an opportunity to do a bit of an outro before I pass it along to everyone. So thank you so much to everyone around the world for joining us today. As we mentioned before, this is the last in our Retravel Live series, where we address the most pressing topics in travel and together look at how we can solve them so the world can retravel the right way. Please visit www.retravellive.com to see previous virtual events, and stay tuned as we look to bring you our next series of virtual events. And quickly, we're going to go back to each of our guests to understand more, to share with our audience where they can go to learn more about each of your work. So I'll pass it around. Sarah, where can people go to find out more about the work you're doing?
Well, actually, a lot of my work that's published online appears on the Telegraph. So anyone who wants to go to the Telegraph website, a lot of my articles are there. And actually, a lot of the work that I've been doing around Africa and conservation, and that's telegraph.co.uk. I also have an Instagram handle that people can follow. I have to admit, I did go a bit quiet over the pandemic because of the whole travel shaming thing. But you know, I'm ready to get back out there now and get back on it. So, and that's Sarah Marshall, travel writer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. Tony, where can people go to find out more about the great work you're doing around the world?
We have a website. It's www.iata.org. And on there, you'll find all kinds of resources. You'll see what destinations are open, what destinations are closed, what the restrictions are. You'll find out more about the travel pass. And you'll find out a lot about what the airlines are doing to try and make travel safe.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Oneika, where can people go to find out all about the great work you're doing?
Well, if you are local to the New York area, you can watch me on television, NBC New York Channel 4. Alternatively, you can go to my website, www.oneikaraymond.com. And if you want the latest and greatest travels, she's got a gram, and you can find me there, Oneika Traveler. It's at Oneika Traveler, and that's Traveler with 2 L's because I am Canadian. So you can find me there as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to pass it back to Bruce to wrap things up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, all I can say is this was amazing. We get lucky with panels sometimes because you're all so different and you all offered a different perspective, and it was so good. I wish we could go longer, and we didn't get to so many questions. So all of you who asked those questions, please come back to us directly in our social maybe. I also have Instagram and Twitter. Bruce Poontip is. And please ask the questions and we'll try and answer, or go to Gadventures and info@gadventures.com. There's amazing questions that we didn't get to, unfortunately, but thank you everybody. Sarah, Tony, Oneika, this was an amazing panel, like really so informative. And unfortunately, I don't want to end Retravel now after doing this one. So maybe can we do a revival? They're reviving shows these days. Maybe we can do a revival of Retravel. But anyways, thank you. Thank you very much. And especially thanks everyone for tuning in to all of our Retravels. They've been amazing, but all of the agents and travelers, we need people traveling again. There's no better time. Let's travel better on the other side, all of those great things. But hopefully this helped with easing some of those concerns you might have. And I know you must, if you have those questions, please reach out to us in any ways that we've mentioned and we'll get the answers for you. So thanks again. Thank you for taking the time with us today, and for those sharing your experiences with us today. And then we say bye.
Take care.